The Rolls-Royce was supposed to be alone that night, but when Alexander opened the garage door, he found a child asleep in the shadows. Christmas Eve laid a thin sheet of snow over the hilltop estate. The garage door lifted with a smooth hum. Alexander Crane, who liked machines more than surprises, froze when the amber side light spilled over a small figure curled behind the spare winter tires. A girl, knees tucked, jacket too short, clutching a battered notebook. The cover, smudged and torn, still showed 4 blunt words. For Alexander Crane. He hated coincidences, especially on holidays. He crouched, set his wool scarf over her shoulders, and listened to the clipped rhythm of her breath. The battery charger on the wall blinked its red diode, 3 times a second, steady as a metronome. Small, wet shoe prints overlapped the Rolls-Royce's tracks, leading from the side door. He would check the lock and cameras later. Now, the child. Her eyes opened, dark, alert, not wild. "Are you hungry?" he asked, keeping his voice low. "You're Alexander Crane?" Her voice was thin but sure. He nodded. She glanced past the car, studying tools and spacing, the blinking charger. "You change the oil every 4,500 miles, she said quietly. "The rag is dark, not black, and the charger's blinking faster. Battery got drained when the door stayed open." Not boasting, observing. He felt oddly seen. "What's your name? How do you know mine?" "Lila," she said, taking the thermos of warm water he offered. "My mother taught me to read your name. It's on this notebook." He touched the cover. In the corner, a hurried line. "If you're reading this, everything has begun." His chest tightened. "Where's your mother?" Silence. Snow ticked against the small window. Procedure hovered. Call the police, call child services, but the faint scar at her wrist pulled his hand away from the phone. "It's too cold out here," he said, as if signing something binding. "Come inside first. We'll talk." "I'm not supposed to go into strangers' houses." A pause. "But you don't feel like a stranger." "Because of the notebook?" "And the smell," she said. "Oil. My mom's coat used to smell like this." He swallowed a memory and led her through the corridor. In the kitchen, he lit the fireplace. Flames took to the logs like the starved to bread. He set cocoa to warm, draped a blanket over her shoulders, more a promise than an embrace. "Any allergies?" "I just don't like garlic," she said. "Lucky us. No garlic in this house." They sat with the crackle of the fire. She kept a palm on the notebook as though anchoring herself to a ledge. "Mr. Crane," Lila said at last, "my mother told me, if something happened, I should find you. What's her name?" He already felt a name press at the door of his mind. Instead of answering, she slid out a torn scrap tucked inside. If everything collapses, Lila must go to Alexander. Trust no one else. The handwriting ran tilted, urgent. The past stepped into the room and stood by the fire. "Are you tired?" he asked. "There's a couch in the living room, soft, safe." "Will you lock the doors?" "All of them. Windows, too. The garage as well." He tapped his watch. "If anything happens, this calls people." She nodded, rose, and paused. "I don't have sleeping shoes. I keep them on, in case." "Here," he said, looking at her wet sneakers and the fire. "You can sleep without shoes. No one will make you run." She untied her laces slowly. Damp gray socks showed. He fetched a new wool pair and set them down without comment. She put them on and for the first time smiled, small as a pilot light catching. On the couch, she curled under the blanket, notebook tucked beneath her cheek. He stood a moment, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest, a waveform more beautiful than any he'd stared at on ICU monitors years ago. "Good night, Lila," he whispered. Maybe she heard. The fire surely did. Before dimming the lights, he glanced through the window. Snow continued, fine as breath. In the white lay a thin, dark line, fresh tire marks at the gate. He would handle codes, cameras and lawyers after the holiday, adult work for the morning. Tonight, he switched his phone off silent. For the first time in years, he wanted every sound. To know a door if it whispered. To know the Rolls-Royce wasn't alone anymore. To believe that some glitches were not errors, but grace. He sat on the kitchen floor, back to the cabinet, listening to flames and breathing. Somewhere down the hall, a child slept with her cheek on a notebook as if it were a shoulder. Outside, Christmas snow tapped the glass, gentle as a hand. And at the quiet hinge between the old map and the new, a name brushed his thoughts, not yesterday or tomorrow, but now. Alexander. He understood. From this night on, the map inside him would have to be redrawn. Morning seeped into the house quietly, pale light bending through tall windows. Alexander Crane had not really slept. He had sat most of the night in the armchair, listening for doors, measuring the rhythm of the girl's breathing from across the hall. When he finally rose, the notebook lay on the kitchen counter where Lila had set it down before curling under the blanket. The cover was cracked, corners bent, pages swollen from damp. Yet the weight of it felt deliberate, as though paper and ink had been carrying something for years. He opened the first page. The handwriting leapt out at him, slanted, practical, no flourish. He hadn't seen it in nearly 2 decades, but recognition was instant. Mariah. The memory was sharp. The young assistant who had stayed in the office past midnight, sorting ledgers, cross-checking invoices when the company had been one bad quarter away from collapse. It was Mariah who had spotted the forged numbers that would have buried him in scandal. She had placed the evidence in his hands, eyes steady, and said simply, "I trust you'll do the right thing." And he had promised her, in that fragile, terrifying season, "If you ever need me, I'll be there." The letter inside the notebook was dated that same year. 2 decades old. Ink slightly faded. "Alexander, if this reaches you, I may already be gone. I saved your company once. I need you to save my daughter now. Her name is Lila." The words tightened in his chest. Behind him, footsteps shuffled. Lila stood in the doorway, wrapped in the blanket like a small traveler in an oversized cloak. Her eyes darted to the notebook in his hands. "You read it," she said softly. Alexander closed the cover but didn't hide it. "Yes." "Your mother, she worked for me." Lila walked closer, fingers tugging the blanket edge. "She said you owed us." The word owed struck sharper than any accusation. Debt was something he understood better than most men. Financial, contractual, the kind measured in numbers and penalties. But this was a different currency. Trust, left unpaid for 20 years. "I didn't know she had a daughter," he admitted. His voice sounded older than the room. "I didn't know. She was gone." Lila's eyes dropped to the floor. "She got sick. She said it was nothing, but it didn't stop. Before she left, she made me memorize your name. She said, 'If the world falls apart, find Alexander Crane.'" The fireplace cracked, filling the silence he couldn't. He reached for something to ground himself. "Lila, this notebook, do you know what's inside?" She shook her head. "Only that it was important. She said to guard it, even if I didn't understand. Alexander opened a later section. Numbers lined the pages, columns of transactions, names of shell companies. Beside them, Mariah's notes. Transfer, pending, flag. He recognized the structure. Forensic accounting, the kind used to track money when someone was hiding it. He exhaled slowly. Mariah hadn't stopped working after she left his firm. She had been investigating something. Maybe the same corruption that had haunted him then. He closed the notebook again, placing his palm over the cover. Across from him, Lila sat at the table, blanket pooled at her feet. She looked very small, but her gaze was steady. "Will you keep me?" she asked. Not pleading. Just a child stating a fact she needed settled. The question pulled at a scar deep inside. Ruth had once asked him the same in the hospital when the machines were failing. "Will you stay until the end?" He had said yes, and held her hand as the line flattened. Now here was another vow waiting, written not in marriage or medicine, but in the eyes of a child. He chose silence, because silence was safer than promises. But he reached forward, slid the cocoa mug toward her, and said, "For now, you're safe here." Lila nodded, as if she understood more than he wanted her to. She opened the notebook again, pointing to Mariah's neat margin note. "If I fail, he must not." The weight of the debt settled across his shoulders. It was not the kind you paid with checks. It was the kind that demanded the rest of your life. And Alexander Crane, who had lived years without owing anyone anything, realized he had already been claimed. The house had grown quieter after sunrise. Snow softened every edge outside, and inside, only the ticking grandfather clock and the occasional crackle of the fireplace broke the silence. Alexander brewed coffee in the kitchen while Lila traced circles on the rim of her mug. She was studying everything again, the layout of drawers, the pattern of light across the tiles, as if cataloging a new environment. It was then he noticed the mark. When she lifted the mug with both hands, her collar slipped. A thin, red-brown scar curved along the side of her neck, just above the collarbone. Not the kind children get from falling on playgrounds. Too deliberate, too cruel. He set his coffee down. "Lila," he said carefully, "where did that come from?" Her eyes flicked to his, then away. She pulled the blanket higher, tucking her chin down. "It's nothing." "No," he said gently. "That isn't nothing." For a long moment she sat very still. Then she whispered, "They made us work, in the kitchen. If you dropped a plate or spoke too loud, they put ice on your skin until you couldn't move." His stomach clenched. He'd heard rumors before, broken foster homes, private care centers masking abuse, but hearing it in her voice gave it weight he could not dismiss. "Who are they?" he asked. Her shoulders shrank inward. "I can't say. If I talk, they'll find me. They said they always find you." The fear in her tone was heavier than the words. Alexander felt the old instinct to retreat into logic, to analyze, to detach. But Ruth's memory surfaced, her hand guiding his once toward patients in the hospital. "You can't fix everything with equations, Alex. Sometimes you just stay. And listen." He lowered his voice. "Lila, you're safe here. Nobody will hurt you in this house. Do you understand?" She gave the smallest nod, though her fingers tightened around the mug as though expecting it to be snatched away. He crossed to the linen closet, pulled out a heavier quilt, and draped it around her shoulders. The weight of fabric seemed to press some of the tension out of her frame. She leaned slightly into it, testing the warmth. For the first time, he saw her eyelids lower not from fear, but from drowsiness. The lines in her forehead eased. Alexander sat opposite her, watching the faint steam from his untouched coffee. Questions churned in his mind about the notebook, about Mariah, about what kind of network would mark a child into silence. But all of that would come later. Right now, the battlefield was simple. One child, one scar, one night of rest she had not been given in far too long. "Do you want to lie down properly?" he asked. "There's a room upstairs with a real bed. No one else has used it." Lila hesitated, torn between instinct and exhaustion. Finally, she whispered, "Only if the door locks." "It does," Alexander said, "and I'll show you how." Upstairs, he turned the brass key in the old lock, let her test it herself. She slid under the quilt, the notebook still clutched to her chest. Standing in the doorway, he listened to her breathing soften into steady rhythm. The scar at her neck caught a line of winter light, faint but undeniable, a story carved into flesh. Alexander closed the door quietly. For the first time in years, the house did not echo with emptiness. It carried the fragile weight of someone sleeping safely and the unspoken vow of a man who would not let silence win again. Alexander had not spoken Mariah's name aloud in nearly 20 years. It tasted like dust on his tongue now, a memory pulled from the bottom drawer. Yet everything in the notebook was hers, every neat figure, every sharply written note. That evening, after ensuring Lila was asleep upstairs, he sat at his desk in the study. The notebook lay open under the green lamp, pages spread like quiet testimony. Mariah had always been exact. Even in those early days of the company, when deadlines blurred into dawn and the office smelled of burnt coffee, she had a way of anchoring chaos. While others scrambled to impress him, she simply noticed. She noticed discrepancies in ledgers, gaps in contracts, silence where numbers should have spoken. One night, long ago, she had stayed behind and placed a folder in front of him. "If you don't deal with this, it will bury us." Inside, proof of forged accounts and executive siphoning funds. She had saved his career, his company, perhaps even his life's work. And now, in these pages, she was speaking again. The numbers weren't random. They formed a trail. Shell corporations, moving money through charities, then into what looked like foster contracts. Beside one entry, her handwriting pressed hard into the page, QF12. Alexander frowned. He remembered the code vaguely, an internal label from a project proposal years back, never approved. Why was it here, linked to payments disguised as childcare subsidies? He leaned back, rubbing his temples. Mariah hadn't stopped working when she left his company. She had kept digging, following money, building a map of something darker. And now her daughter was sleeping under his roof, holding the last fragments of her mother's investigation. He thought of Lila's words that morning. "She said you owed us." The debt had a face now. Not numbers on a ledger, but a small girl with scars who asked if the door upstairs locked. Alexander reached for his phone, almost calling an old contact in finance, then stopped. He remembered Ruth's cautionary whisper years ago. "Don't rush into battles with ghosts, Alex. They're never alone." His eyes fell on a folded page tucked at the back of the notebook. Different paper, older. He slid it free. It wasn't numbers this time, but a line written in Mariah's hand. "If everything falls apart, tell Lila the truth. Tell her I fought. Tell her I trusted you." His throat tightened. He hadn't kept many promises in his life outside of Ruth. But this one, scribbled in a dying woman's ink, felt binding. A sound pulled him from thought. At the study door, Lila stood barefoot, wrapped in the quilt, the notebook still hugged to her chest. Her eyes found his, searching. "I dreamed about her," she whispered. "She was writing something, but I couldn't read it." Alexander rose slowly, gesturing her closer. "She was brave," he said, voice low but steady. braver than most people I've ever known, and she wanted you safe more than anything else." Lila's eyes glistened, though she did not cry. She climbed onto the armchair beside him, setting the notebook between them as if it belonged to both. In the fireplace, a log cracked, throwing a brief shower of sparks. Shadows swayed across the room. For a moment, Alexander felt as though Mariah herself lingered there, silent but watching, asking him again to do the right thing. And this time, the request was not about his company or his reputation. It was about a child asleep in his house, waiting for him to keep a promise he had nearly forgotten. By the third morning, Alexander thought he had begun to adjust. Meals shared in silence, Lila mapping the house with cautious eyes, the notebook never more than an arm's reach away. But safety was fragile, like glass under frost. It was the crunch of tires that warned him first. He stood by the window of his upstairs study, coffee in hand. When he saw it, fresh tracks pressed into the snow outside the gate. Wide, heavy tread. Not delivery trucks. Not neighbors. An SUV. He set the cup down. Outside the iron gate, the street was empty now, but the marks were recent. Too recent. At lunch, he didn't mention it. Lila sat across the table, quietly peeling an orange he'd set before her. Yet when the knife slipped and she glanced at the window, her face drained of color. She whispered, "That car." Alexander's chest tightened. "You've seen it before?" Her nod was tiny, but her hands trembled. "At the place I came from. They used it to move kids. If you ran, they'd put you in the back." The air in the kitchen turned sharp, like ice cracking underfoot. Alexander reached across the table, steadying the knife from her fingers. "You're not going back." But her eyes stayed wide, darting toward the window as if the SUV might materialize there again. That evening, he pulled footage from the security system. The cameras showed a black SUV idling just beyond the gate, engine rumbling, windows tinted. The license plate was smeared with snow but partly visible. Whoever it was, they weren't lost. They were waiting. Alexander copied the footage onto a secure drive. Then, after a pause, he called someone he hadn't spoken to in years, a retired FBI analyst who had once shared a drink with him after a congressional hearing. The man still owed him a favor. "I need a plate run," Alexander said without introduction. "Partial numbers, SUV, black, Massachusetts plates, maybe government pool, maybe not. Can you do it quietly?" The man sighed on the other end, but agreed. "Send it over." "And Crane, what are you mixed up in?" "Debt," Alexander said flatly before ending the call. When he stepped back into the living room, Lila was curled in the armchair, blanket pulled to her chin. She looked smaller than ever, but her eyes tracked him carefully. "Was it them?" she asked. "Maybe," he admitted. "But I'll know more soon." Silence pressed between them. Then she said, "They don't just want me. They want the notebook. Mom said, if they find it, everything disappears." Alexander sat down opposite her, the firelight catching in his hair. "Then we don't let them. Not the notebook. Not you." Her lip quivered, but she held his gaze. "Promise?" He had failed enough promises in his life to know the weight of one spoken aloud. Still, he answered, steady as steel. "I promise." Outside, the snow thickened, burying the tracks. But Alexander knew the SUV would return. Whoever circled his gate was not simply curious. They were hunting. And for the first time in years, Alexander Crane felt the old spark, the same fire that had once built a company from nothing, ignite in his chest again. Only now, it wasn't profit he meant to protect. It was a child. Snow still clung to the hedges when Alexander drove downtown 2 days later. Lila remained at the house under the watch of a trusted security guard he had hired overnight. The image of the black SUV haunted him. Too deliberate, too patient. If Mariah's notebook was right, the danger wasn't random. It was systemic. He pushed through the glass doors of the county records office. The air smelled of paper and dust, an old machine still turning. At the counter, he gave the clerk a name. Mariah Torres. The clerk typed slowly, squinting at the screen. Plenty of Torres, narrow it down. Filed letters, child custody, 10 to 15 years ago. The clerk raised an eyebrow but disappeared into the back. Alexander waited, pulse ticking like the clock overhead. Finally, a stack of yellowed files landed on the desk. Inside were letters, Mariah's handwriting, unmistakable. 3, dated years apart, all addressed to Child Protective Services, each one naming him, Alexander Crane, as guardian should anything happen to her. He skimmed the stamps at the bottom. Pending verification. Not rejected, not approved, just frozen, abandoned in limbo. Alexander's jaw tightened. Bureaucracy was rarely this convenient. Someone had buried these on purpose. He traced one envelope's postmark. It was dated only 3 weeks before her death. His throat burned. She had tried, right until the end. A voice broke his focus. Digging up ghosts, Alex? He turned. At the far table stood a man in a gray coat, spectacles perched on a long nose. Lawrence Hale, lawyer, widower, once Ruth's colleague. They had not spoken in years. You still practicing? Alexander asked warily. Retired, Hale said, stepping closer. But I never stopped reading the obituaries. When Mariah's name appeared, I wondered if you knew. Alexander slid the folder shut. I didn't. Not until her daughter showed up at my door. Hale's brows knit. And now? Now I know someone erased her trail, Alexander said. His voice was iron. And I intend to unerase it. Hale studied him for a long moment. Then you'll need more than outrage. You'll need proof. Chain of custody, witnesses. Otherwise, these papers will disappear again. The truth of it cut deep. Alexander pocketed copies, careful not to show the tremor in his hands. That night, back at the estate, he spread the documents on the oak table. Lila stood beside him, notebook hugged to her chest. She pointed at the faded ink. That's her writing. She wrote late at night with her old pen. The loop on the Y. It's hers. Alexander looked down at her small hand resting against the paper and felt the weight of both past and present settle. She tried, he said quietly. She tried to make sure you came to me. And someone made sure it never happened. Lila swallowed hard. So, they wanted me lost. He met her eyes. Yes, because lost children are easier to move, easier to erase. For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy, but not empty. Then Alexander slid the folder toward her. We won't let her voice be erased again. In the fireplace, the logs shifted, throwing sparks like tiny rebellions. The letters, once buried, were alive again under the same roof as the child they were meant to protect. And Alexander Crane, who had spent 2 decades avoiding the word guardian, realized the title had already claimed him. It arrived in silence. On a windless morning, Alexander opened the front door for the paper and found instead a plain white envelope lying alone on the stone step. No stamp, no address. Just his name typed on the front. Alexander Crane. Inside, the note was brief. Return the girl to state custody. Leave the notebook with her belongings. Do this quietly, and your reputation, assets, and freedom remain intact. Refuse, and every secret you've ever buried will surface. Consider this your only warning. Typed, mechanical. No handwriting to trace, no warmth, no humanity. Alexander folded it once, then again, until the paper was a sharp square in his palm. He had spent a lifetime outmaneuvering competitors and adversaries, but this was different. This wasn't business. This was a child asleep upstairs. He burned the letter in the fireplace, watched the ash curl like wings before collapsing inward. But Lila had seen him at the hearth. She stepped closer, blanket wrapped tight. Her eyes darted from the flames to his clenched fists. "What did it say?" she asked. Alexander hesitated. He had sworn to shield her. But he remembered Ruth's voice in the hospital. "Don't lie to people you love. Even children can smell lies." "They want me to give you up," he said, voice low. "And they think I might." Her face froze, eyes wide, then shuddered as if she'd been expecting this all along. She whispered, "Everyone does. They all send me back." The words stabbed deeper than the letter had. He stepped forward, kneeling so his eyes were level with hers. "Not me," he said firmly. "You don't understand," she replied, trembling. "If you keep me, they'll hurt you too. They always win." Alexander shook his head. "Lila, listen to me. I've lost before. I've buried things I can never get back. But I will not bury you. Do you believe me?" Her small hands gripped the edge of the blanket until her knuckles whitened. Then, slowly, she nodded. Not out of faith yet, but out of the faintest hope. That night, he called Hale, the retired lawyer. "They're not just erasing records, they're threatening me directly." "Then it's bigger than you thought," Hale answered grimly. "You'll need to go public before they control the story. Shine light faster than they can move." "Going public puts her in danger." "And keeping silent," Hale countered. "That already has." Alexander hung up restless, pacing the study. The flames in the grate were low, and above them Lila sat curled in the armchair, eyes following his every step. Finally, he stopped. "You asked me once if I'd keep you. The answer is yes. Whatever comes." Her eyes softened, though doubt lingered. "And if they come here? Then they'll find I'm not alone," he said. He laid a hand on the notebook resting in her lap. "Your mother left us a weapon, her truth. And truth is harder to kill than people think." The fire cracked sharply, as though in agreement. Outside, the snow fell without sound, covering tracks but not erasing them. Upstairs, when Lila finally slept, Alexander stood watch at the window. The gate lay still, but he knew eyes were out there, waiting. The war had left the shadows. It was at his doorstep now, and he had already chosen his side. The next day, Alexander returned to the notebook with fresh urgency. He spread Mariah's pages across the desk, the green lamp casting a pool of light over columns of numbers. He had once audited billion-dollar firms, tracing capital through shell companies across oceans. This was worse. Mariah's handwriting in the margins wasn't just math, it was testimony. Family disruption index equals leverage. Children relocated equals higher subsidy. Erase guardianship to secure transfer. Each phrase landed like a blow. The system was rigged. The more children taken from their families, the more money flowed. Caseworkers were pressured to separate, not protect. Foster contracts turned into assets. Children became entries on a balance sheet, and threaded through the maze of transactions, Alexander saw the mark again. QF12. Payments hidden under community housing flowed directly into private real estate trusts. Mariah had been chasing the connection. She'd nearly pinned it. He closed his eyes. Ruth's voice came back soft but fierce. "If you know the truth, you can't stand still, Alex." He picked up the phone. The call went to Richard Bowen, an investigative journalist he hadn't spoken to in years. Richard had once been the conscience of finance reporting until too many lawsuits pushed him into obscurity. "It's been a long time," Richard said warily. "I have something," Alexander told him. "Not corporate fraud. Worse, it involves children." There was silence on the line, then a low whistle. "Email me encrypted. If it's what you say, I'll burn my last bridge to publish it." When Alexander hung up, he noticed Lila in the doorway. She'd been listening, notebook hugged against her chest. "They won't like that," she said softly. "No," Alexander admitted. "They won't. But they'll have to answer for it." She stepped into the room, eyes drawn to the scattered pages. "Mom used to sit up at night writing those words. She said, if people knew, they'd stop pretending it was safe." Alexander reached for one page. The ink nearly torn through by Mariah's heavy hand. "Erase the children. Erase the witnesses." The chill of it went through him. He looked at Lila, flesh and blood proof of the system Mariah had fought. "Your mother was braver than most," he said. "She didn't just save my company. She tried to save hundreds of children, maybe thousands." Lila's fingers tightened on the quilt. "And they killed her." He didn't answer. Some truths didn't need words. That night, Richard called back. "I'm in. We'll publish. But Alex, when we print this, you'll be exposed too. They'll come harder." Alexander looked across the room at Lila, who had fallen asleep curled on the couch, notebook beneath her arm. The firelight painted her face in soft lines, fragile but steady. "Then let them come," he said quietly. "I'm not alone anymore." Outside, snow smothered the garden in silence. But inside, Mariah's voice whispered through every line of ink, refusing to be buried. And Alexander Crane, for the first time in decades, felt not just debt, but duty. The house fell into darkness at 11:17 p.m. Alexander had been in the study, rereading Mariah's notes, when every lamp flickered once, then died. Even the hum of the heating system collapsed. Silence pressed against the walls. Only the fireplace in the living room kept a weak glow. He moved fast. Years of instinct sharpened by sleepless nights kicked in. Backup generator? Offline. Power cut deliberately. "Lila," he whispered into the hall. Her door creaked. She was already awake, clutching the notebook. Her eyes were wide, pupils blown in the dark. "It's them," she breathed. He led her quickly to the old library at the back of the house, a narrow room Ruth once loved. Behind one shelf was a hidden alcove, a fireproof storage crawl he had designed years ago for servers and prototypes. Now it became a refuge. "Stay here," he said, crouching to meet her eyes. "No matter what you hear, you don't move until I open this door. Understand?" Her small hand grabbed his wrist. "They know my name." "Then let them come for me first," Alexander said. He closed the door gently, the click of the latch sounding final. Downstairs, the silence cracked. A faint scrape, the unmistakable sound of glass shifting in its frame. Then a footstep, deliberate and heavy, on the marble of the foyer. Alexander moved like he once had through server rooms at midnight, precise, economical. He slipped a heavy wrench from the utility cabinet. Not a gun, not yet, just weight in his hand. From the shadows of the dining room, he saw him. A man in black, face half covered, but confident enough to call out into the darkness. Lila. The sound of her name twisted Alexander's gut. This wasn't random. Whoever it was had hunted her before. "You shouldn't have come," Alexander said evenly, stepping into view. The intruder turned, surprised only for a second, then smirked. "You think you can keep her? Crane, you have no idea who you're up against." Alexander lifted the wrench. "Try me." The fight was brief, but brutal. The man lunged. Alexander sidestepped, driving the wrench into his ribs. A crash of glass as they staggered into the low table, shards scattering like ice. The intruder swung back, grazing Alexander's jaw. Pain flashed, but he anchored his weight, shoved hard, and pinned the man against the wall. "Who sent you?" Alexander hissed. The man spat. "She belongs to the system. You can't win." Before Alexander could press further, red-blue strobes flared through the window. Sirens cut the silence, the private alarm he'd triggered through his watch hours ago. The intruder cursed, shoved away, and fled through the broken glass door into the night. Police swept the grounds within minutes, but the SUV was gone. Only the shattered door remained, snow gusting in through the frame. When the officers finally left, Alexander returned upstairs. He opened the hidden alcove. Lila was curled tight, arms around the notebook, face wet with silent tears. "They said your name," she whispered. "I heard them." Alexander crouched, steadying his voice. "Yes, they came, but they didn't take you. And they won't." He wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, carrying her back to the fire. She leaned against him, small but solid, her heartbeat a fragile metronome against his chest. For the first time since Ruth's passing, Alexander realized his house was no longer empty. It was a fortress, not of stone or steel, but of promises made in the dark. And tonight, promises had held. The trial drew headlines across the state. What had begun as scraps in a battered notebook became front-page news. The Foster Network, the falsified Family Disruption Index, the flow of money through empty real estate trusts. Mariah's handwriting, steady, patient, relentless, was read aloud in the courtroom. The jury listened. So did Lila, clutching Alexander's hand as though tethered to shore. When the verdict came, guilty for the officials who had buried her mother's letters, Lila exhaled like someone who had been holding her breath for years. Outside, cameras swarmed. Alexander gave no statement. He simply held Lila close and walked her past the chaos, past the microphones, into the waiting car. Some victories did not belong to the public. Spring thawed the last of the snow when Alexander drove her to the place Ruth had once called her lookout. A hill at the edge of the estate, overlooking the valley where maples spread like a green tide in summer. Ruth had loved it for the quiet, the way the horizon bent soft against the sky. There, Alexander had ordered wood and tools delivered, but when he lifted the hammer, it was Lila who insisted on driving the first nail. Together, plank by plank, they built a small treehouse against the oldest oak. The boards were uneven, the ladder a little crooked, but the walls stood firm. And when they painted a sign, Lila wrote the words herself in careful, deliberate strokes. Lila Crane's home. When she hung it above the door, her smile was shy but unshakable. That evening, inside the treehouse, the two of them sat cross-legged with Coco. The notebook rested between them, its pages now copied, preserved, no longer the only proof. Lila brushed a hand over its cover. "Do we still need to keep it?" Alexander considered the question. The book had been a shield, a weapon, a beacon. But now, looking at her, he realized its work was done. "We'll keep it," he said gently. Not because we need it, but because it's a piece of her. A piece of how much she loved you. Lila leaned her head against his arm. Then, can I write in it too? Not just her words. Mine. His throat tightened. Yes, he said. It's yours, now. Night fell soft. From the window of the treehouse, the valley glimmered with lights like stars fallen to earth. Inside, the lantern cast a circle of gold. Lila yawned, curling into the blanket Alexander had carried up. She whispered, half asleep, "It's warm here. I don't need my shoes." Alexander's heart bent under the weight of the words. He stroked her hair gently, watching her slip into dreams. For the first time in 2 decades, he felt Ruth's presence not as grief, but as warmth. The warmth of a vow fulfilled. "Mariah," he murmured into the stillness. "I kept my word, and I'll keep it, as long as she needs me." Outside, spring wind moved through the branches. Inside, a child slept safe. The house on the hill was no longer empty. The garage no longer silent. The estate no longer haunted. Justice had not ended in the courtroom. It had begun here, in a treehouse on Ruth's lookout, where a girl could finally sleep without fear. And Alexander Crane, once a man alone with his machines, understood the truth. Some debts were never meant to be paid back with money. They were meant to be lived forward, in the shelter you gave, the promises you kept, and the love you chose. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If you'd like to hear more, please subscribe to the channel. Your support means a lot.